Welcome to the Textile Institute's webinar on cotton, its journey to sustainability. I'll shortly be in conversation with Burton, a world expert on cotton. A graduate in colour chemistry at Leeds University, he gained much of his extensive knowledge through 35 years working for Marks & Spencer. He was a fabric development technologist and developed into building expertise in jersey fabrics and then cotton. As interest in sustainability grew in the early 2000s, he became the cotton, then sustainable fibres specialist, and was responsible for sourcing these fibres for M&S apparel and home textiles from many global sources. He also represented the company on a number of important global sustainable fibre committees and organisations. Since he left M&S around 12 years ago, Graham has delivered consultancy on many aspects of sustainable textiles to brands, retailers and NGOs, from the raw material through to the finished product. He provides them with development, training, sourcing, product innovation and advice on environmental issues and solutions. So now turning to you, Graham, could you describe to me how important cotton is today? And what level of demand does it have in relation to other major fibres that are being used in apparel and textiles?
Well, I think, I guess historically, cotton was the major fibre, and it still is the major natural fibre by a long, long way. However, polyester has overtaken it and has overtaken it quite considerably. So it's really, and often you see from a pricing point of view, cotton tends to follow what's happening with polyester, and polyester may follow what happens in cotton. So I think that cotton has its definite place in certain types of products, but it is no longer the largest fibre by quite some way. Polyester is the biggest.
So when, during your time at M&S, did you really become aware of cotton getting a focus on sustainability? What was that change all about?
For many years, although I was involved in cotton products, my concern about the cotton itself was never that prominent, to be honest. And I might have just regarded it as white stuff that made t-shirts and underwear, etc. But I think in the mid-90s, there was probably beginning to be more of a movement towards giving consideration to actually how cotton was grown, who grew it, where it was grown, what conditions were the people working in that grew it. And you started to see people, campaigners, I guess, at that time. Catherine Hamnett, I remember particularly, campaigning against some of the things she felt were wrong about cotton at that time, and started to promote organic cotton. And I'm afraid in the early days, it didn't really get very far. There wasn't customer demand, there wasn't customer understanding. I think brands thought it should be totally natural and ecru, and the garments looked horrible, and they were high prices. And so it probably really stagnated, certainly in the mass market, for quite some years. For me, the breakthrough came, for me personally, when the Fair Trade Foundation made cotton one of their raw materials that they produced standards for. And I think at that time, certainly in the UK, there was already a great understanding of what the fair trade mark meant, what it meant for the people who produced coffee, tea, etc. And it was at that point that I was actually able to make a breakthrough in M&S, and we launched Fair Trade Cotton, and it went from there. I think then the next big breakthrough was probably the Better Cotton Initiative, known as BCI. They approached sustainability from a slightly different point of view. Their aim was to really get sustainability into the mass market. Some people don't entirely like what BCI have set themselves as standards, but I have to say they've done a big job in sustainability and getting it into the mass market, mainstream, and customer understanding.
I think, Graham, what we'll do, that's really good that you've mentioned BCI here. Let's come back to that a bit later with some of the other sustainable fibre types. Let's just sort of stay on the global picture at the moment, if I may, and just talk to me about some of the main global locations where cotton is being grown today.
Again, for many years, China was the largest grower of cotton. They were taken over by India probably about 10, 11 years ago now. And India is the largest grower of cotton, followed by China. Then you have some way behind that, but you have countries like Pakistan, Brazil, Australia, Turkey, Uzbekistan, and in total there's probably about 80 countries across the world who have some form of cotton in their growing in their country. But China and India, I would say, and the only United States, if I didn't mention them, of course, United States being dominant. And in fact, from an export point of view, the United States is the largest exporter of cotton. China tends to consume nearly all its own cotton. India tends to consume nearly all its own cotton.
Yes, thank you. You've mentioned two particular locations that I'd just like to go into a bit more detail about with you, which are Uzbekistan and China. Now, I think everybody, or many of the people joining us today, will be aware of Uzbekistan and the Xinjiang region in China, where there are ongoing issues for sourcing cotton for ethical reasons. Could you just talk to me about these issues, and then how do brands make sure that they avoid using cotton from these regions? So first of all, something about the issues, and then we'll go on to brands.
Okay, well, if I take Uzbekistan first, because that's probably one that's existed in people's minds for the longest, and I would add Turkmenistan to that list as well now. It really came about, I suppose, with the collapse of the Soviet Union. So up until that time, Uzbekistan was a large grower of cotton, a large supplier of cotton into the Soviet Union. And a lot of it was cultivated using machinery. So it was not hand-picked, it was using machinery. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the economic conditions in some of these ex-Soviet states, the machinery fell into disuse, it wasn't maintained, and hand picking became the method. And there was a lack of labour. And to be honest with you, Uzbekistan made children and people from certain professions go into the cotton fields and pick the cotton. And it was terrible, really. And it got a lot of publicity, bad publicity, of course. And as a consequence, many brands have now for quite some time not approved the use of Uzbek cotton in their products.
We're presumably talking here, Graham, about the 1990s, because the collapse of the Soviet Union was around the late 1980s, right?
Yes, yeah, late 80s, yes. And I don't know for sure. I don't think it's got an awful lot better, to be honest, because we didn't buy any garments from Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan didn't make any garments, at least not for export business. There was very little yarn production in Uzbekistan, so you couldn't find that out. All the cotton, nearly, I think 95% of the cotton, and its large volumes, was exported. Well, the thing you have to find out is, where do they export the cotton to? And in the case of Uzbekistan, the vast majority of it was exported to Bangladesh, which doesn't grow any cotton, so it imports all the cotton that its spinning industry requires. And I had to deal with this at the time I was at Marks and Spencer, and it was easy to say, oh, we're going to ban the use, but how the hell do you do it? How far down do you know your supply chain? And I think that's one of the big things that's changed over the years now. People understand more about where their products come from, have greater dialogue, I hope, further down the supply chain than they may have done historically. And you can, with a lot of effort, bring this about. Now,
this is about traceability, isn't it, Graham?
Yes. Yeah. Now, Xinjiang is a totally different matter, okay, because the scale of it is enormous. To give you some idea, I think the world production of cotton is about 26 million tons. Xinjiang province alone produces 20% of that. If you're going to ban the use of Xinjiang cotton, it's a big job. Now, I think people should, and people have taken steps towards removing it from their supply chain, but it's very difficult. And of course, I think the issues in Xinjiang are more well publicized now. You know, the suppression of the Uyghurs and the forcing them to work into certain labor conditions and so on. But trying to get it out of your supply chain, it's a big, big job. And writing a letter to your suppliers is not enough. You know, you have to put the effort in, because then you have to find alternatives. That's the other thing. So when it's 20% of the world's global supply, the scale of it and the task in front of you is big.
Does that mean then, Graham, just to explore this a bit further, that cotton from that region not only goes to spinning mills in China, but may go further afield into other countries for spinning there?
Yes, it does. I mean, I would think that, you know, the majority is consumed within China. But, you know, like I mentioned that Bangladesh doesn't grow cotton. Well, if you look at two other big cotton spinning countries now that have emerged in the last 10 years, Vietnam and Cambodia, neither of them grow cotton. And so they are importing cotton, and they've been importing from China. So in some ways, well, I don't know. I mean, if it's imported, maybe it's kind of easier for somebody in a different country to say, okay, well, I won't buy it now from China. I'll buy it from somewhere else. Within China, maybe that's more complex, because where are the Chinese going to get the cotton from?
Yes, indeed.
You think of the size of the textile. You think of the size of the textile industry in China, and if it's got all its customers saying, "I don't want any Xinjiang cotton," then China is going to become a huge importer of cotton.
Indeed. No, I understand
And
that.
I know you're going to ask me about prices soon. Well, that plays a big part.
We'll talk about that a bit later. Thank you. That's a very, very, very helpful indeed. Actually, just for people's information, there was an excellent article in the New York Times earlier this month about this very topic. And I know, Graham, you've read it, and
Yes.
one or two of our members have. Perhaps somebody during the course of this webinar can just put the exact date that that was in the New York Times, and you can read it for yourselves if you need to know more. So just moving on then, and you briefly did refer to fair trade and BCI. Can you just talk me through some of the main types and schemes of sustainable cotton as it's available today?
There are quite a number now, but the significant ones, and the ones people will know about, is, and we're going to give this in size, really. So the Better Cotton Initiative, well, first of all, in overall terms, I would say the 4 types of cotton I'm going to talk about now today represent about 20%, 20 to 25% of the global supply of cotton. So it's not small. BCI cotton, Better Cotton Initiative, is about 5 million tons per year now. And they started probably in about 2006, something like that, and have built up to 5 million tons. Then we have organic cotton, which has been around for a long, long time, and is probably today about 250,000 metric tons, organic cotton. Cotton made in Africa is another one, fairly obvious. The cotton comes from Africa, African countries, and that is about 500 to 600,000 tons. That is included in the BCI figure I gave you, by the way, because there is a mutual agreement between BCI and cotton made in Africa that one fits in with the other. There is then the fair trade cotton, which is either fair trade non-organic or fair trade organic cotton. And that is about 17,000 metric tons. So you can see at one end we've got 5 million tons, and at the other end 17,000 tons out of a global supply of 26 million tons.
Okay.
They would be the four major ones
They're
I
the four
would.
major ones. Well, actually, that's very, very helpful. What I think this then leads to is to me being curious to know about certification schemes. How do you, as a retailer or brand, having made the decision to go for one of these, actually check and ensure by certification that your cotton is what it is said to be, and that you can put that
Yes.
on your labeling on your product?
Yeah. Well, I think that if I'll start with organic first, because there are national standards for what is organic agriculture, because that's effectively what cotton is. It's agriculture, and the well-known organic standards for this are NOP in the United States. The EU has a standard for organic agriculture, and there's a Japanese standard for organic agriculture, and I guess there are others. I think the important thing to say here is they are only standards for agriculture. They don't cover any social aspects or anything like that. They don't cover anything about supply chain. But having said, but they are standards for organic agriculture, and there are then certification bodies who will certify farming groups, farming producers, small or large, against those standards. And the certification body will issue a certificate to the producer group saying that group has been certified against the NOP standard from the United States or against the EU standard. And just to say on organic is you cannot sell your cotton as organic cotton until you've been growing it organically for 3 years. So you have to see out the old way, the impacts it had on the soil and so on. And then after 3 years, you can have the full certification. Organic doesn't permit the use of genetically modified seeds, cotton seeds. If I then move to fair trade, it's the Fair Trade Foundation, or FlowCert in Germany. It runs from Germany, and there is a cotton standard that they have. And FlowCert themselves would certify producer groups growing cotton. If you then want to put the fair trade mark on your product, then there are rules in place to show how that cotton moves through the supply chain, through various documentation or these days web-based inputs of data. And I'll move now to BCI, because BCI at 5 million tonnes is the one that's really made the big breakthrough particularly for large retailers and brands. And in some ways they are quite different. Their aim from the beginning was to have cotton grown in better ways, but thinking of getting it to a scale that it would make significant difference. And so you have to be very careful in what you wish to have in your products as a brand or retailer, because if you have BCI cotton, they permit the use of genetically modified seed. And they've always said that is their position. But they still have things about improving water use, biodiversity, elements of decent work, and BCI themselves would go through the certification process of certifying their groups of farming communities. And cotton made in Africa would be the same.
Right. Good. Thank you very much. You one scheme that I've come across is called GOTS, GOTS. Could you just talk to me about that and how that links to sustainable cotton?
Yes. Well, GOTS, or it's the Global Organic Textile Standard, now version 6, is not concerned with the agricultural process at all. It is concerned with what I would call the industrial processes. And in the case of that cotton, that starts with the ginning process, the removing of the seed from the fibre, and then all the way through to finished product. Every stage of the manufacturing process has to go through a audit process and be certified against the Global Organic Textile Standard, which contains a lot of elements about textile processing, so that particularly from a dyeing and finishing point of view. So I think I mentioned earlier on that the organic standards at the time were purely agricultural standards. They didn't tell you anything about fair labour, fair work, about textile processes, and all of the issues that surround that. So GOTS really has kind of taken, and you can only apply GOTS label to a product if it used organic raw materials.
So how widely, if I were to go to a big shopping centre with a range of stores from sort of middle end to high end, would I expect to find some cotton apparel with a GOTS label or trademark on it?
One would hope so, but I have to say, Ian, I've not found any. So it may be that brands have just decided that they don't want to put the mark on it, but they do want to make sure that if they're using a sustainable raw material like organic cotton or organic wool for that matter, or organic flax, linen, that it has then gone through a supply chain which has been audited and approved according to the GOTS standard. And to give you an idea, today there are about 8,000 textile operations who are certified against the GOTS standard.
Good, thank you very much. Now, I know that high-end brands often use specialty long staple cotton. I mean, this is a lovely example of a Pima cotton T-shirt, which is extremely comfortable to wear. Now, what are the main luxury cotton fibres, and of these types, are they available also in a sustainable version? If brands want to do that, if brands want to upgrade their existing luxury cotton?
Well, first of all, just briefly to say, there is medium staple cotton, sometimes called Upland Cotton. And of the 26 million tonnes I mentioned, I would think something of the order of at least 85%, possibly to 90% of the world's cotton is of that type. Right. Upland cotton. And it's what's used to make everyday jeans, polo shirts, etc., etc.
And this is all measured, just, I'm sure everybody knows this, but just in case somebody doesn't, it's normally measured in imperial inches, isn't it? Length of staple.
Well, it was in our day, Ian. It was all called 1 and 3/30 seconds or something.
That's right. Well, I remember very well. Yeah.
The world of millimetres has now crept into this. So a medium staple cotton would be up to about a length of 31 millimetres in length. And the longer it is, the finer you can produce the yarn. Because you need a long fibre to make something very fine to give it strength. If you try and make a very fine yarn out of short cotton, it has no strength. It'll just break. Luxury brands, luxury fabrics are using quite often very fine counts of cotton yarn. And so there you have to use long staple cotton. Then there's extra long staple cotton. And then there's very, very extra long staple cotton. And if you go to the very, very extra long staple cotton, you're talking about Sea Island cotton, which is only grown in the Caribbean. And you'll find absolute luxury shirts, maybe in Jermyn Street in London, somewhere like that, selling at unbelievable prices. And this is incredibly short. There's hardly any of it. Okay, but then you get to the next bit, which is extra long staple and long staple. And as I said, the volumes of that are very small. It's available in China. It's available in India, in the United States, in Peru. Some others, Turkmenistan, I think, has a little bit of extra long staple. Now, then when you come to, so bear in mind, we're now talking very small volume.
And
Now
these
we
are very small volumes, just to be clear, of the existing
correct,
non-sustainable versions. You know, for
correct.
example, you know,
Okay, so now
like
we
this, I think,
yeah.
I'm not sure if that's a sustainable version. So now, given that there are very small quantities, I'm interested to hear of these which can
Yeah.
be available
Okay.
as sustainable.
If I know what T-shirt that is, Ian, I think I do know because I think
I
you've
think
made
we,
me buy. Yeah,
yes, but
I bought one.
I live in this when I'm not wearing my
Yeah.
other lovely
Well,
shirts.
this particular one is Supima cotton, and Supima comes from the United States. Only comes from the United States, and it is an extra long staple cotton, produced very soft, very fine fabrics. Of all the Supima cotton grown in the United States, there are two farmers who grow it organically. Mr. Dozy Alvarez in New Mexico, and I can't remember his friend's name, but they're in New Mexico. And can you buy his cotton? No, is the answer, unless you ask him what you want 3 years before you want it. He's growing Supima organically for customers mainly in Europe who will give their projections of what they need 2 years before they need it. So that gives you some idea of when it comes to these beautiful cottons and sustainable versions of them, how little of it there is around, how hard it is to get hold of.
And we were speaking earlier on about traceability, and you made a very, very strong point about how important it is to trace it. Could I assume then that these two growers that you speak of in New Mexico are working closely with defined spinning mills to make sure
Yes.
that it goes exactly through that route, and you know as a brand or a retailer that it's truly the organic Supima that's going into your garment?
Yes, I mean it still has to go through the certification process, and there are things called transaction certificates, which is a certificate that accompanies the goods as they move through the supply chain, and you know they will exist for any of these sustainable cottons. There has to be what's called a transaction certificate to follow the movement. So that was the example from the United States. Then you come to Egypt. Egypt is famous for its Giza cotton and for its longer staple cottons. It doesn't grow really medium staple. Well, it does a bit, but it's renowned for its beautiful cotton. Well, the amount of organic cotton that it grows is minuscule. And again, what you tend to find is you'll find a spinner or a brand will latch onto it and will place a commitment, and they lock the supply. So I think to answer your question, there is extra long staple out there that's organic. That is, I think there's now BCI Pima cotton, Supima from the United States. But it's very, very hard to get hold of. And if I was actually setting out on the road to introduce more sustainable cottons into my products, I wouldn't be starting with extra long staple. That's not an easy one to solve. You'll get there in the end, maybe, but I would start elsewhere.
Indeed, no, I understand that. Actually, this links interestingly to my next question, which is that people often do and have associated sustainability with higher costs, particularly of raw materials. So, you've talked briefly about some of the costs, but what are the types that do cost more compared with their non-sustainable types? And are there any types of sustainable cotton that can be cost neutral?
Well, the answer to your last question is yes, and that was virtually the whole point of BCI and how it's become the size that it is and entering the mass market that it has. It attempted to has really achieved what I would call effectively a cost neutral position. I mean, particularly now at the scale it's at, it's been able to do that. They also have, and I can answer your question, but if you ask me, they also have a thing called mass balance. Now, if you start asking me what mass balance is, I can tell you, but it's a long thing. So I think for BCI cotton, I would say if cost neutral is where you're trying to get to, then BCI cotton is where to start. You come to the other cottons, and they have an increase in price. And I know this for a fact because things I'm working on right now. But with organic cotton, for example, you imagine a farmer with 2 hectares of land, okay, and he grows conventional cotton. He will get a certain yield. He'll get so many kilos from his farm. When you grow organically, unfortunately, the yields tend to be less. And so he's trying to sort of, he's saying, well, if I was growing conventionally, I'd get this much. If I was growing organically, I only get that much, but I still want the same money. So it tends to command a higher price. Certification plays a part in the cost. And I would say right now, and I think COVID has kind of played into this, I think maybe brands have been rethinking a little bit about their position on sustainability. And the demand for organic right now is unprecedented in how much it's being sought after. And that's inflated the price. At the end of the day, cotton is one of those things that is it's a tradable commodity, and there is demand for organic cotton. So organic cotton today is, well, I'll give you an example. I'm not going to say who the companies are and so on. But India is the largest producer of organic cotton. And I would have said it's normally about 20% more expensive than conventional cotton. But in the example I've got is that maybe 6 weeks ago, I was quoted a price of cotton from India. And last week, I was quoted a price from the same producer in India. And this isn't a textile producer, this is the farming producer group. And it's probably increased by 20% in that time. So it does cost more to produce these more sustainable cottons, with the exception, I would say, of BCI. But right now, the demand is adding to that cost.
I'm with you. Thank you very much. I mean, you've obviously worked for many, many years, both at M&S and in particular for the past 10 or 12 years with a very wide variety of organizations, both large and specialty. What would you say have been the challenges that you've come across implementing sustainable cotton across various brands and retailers?
Well, we've already discussed price. That's one.
Yes.
But I think one of the most difficult things is if you don't know where your cotton comes from now, then how the hell do you go about introducing a better cotton? And I would also say that my view always was the quality comes first. So I would not have sacrificed the quality of the product just so that I could have something that was organic or fair trade or whatever. And I think that finding out where your stuff comes from is critical to all of this. And you should attempt to avoid any major disruption to your supply chain. So you may go and find there is some fantastic organic cotton producer in Paraguay, right? For example, there was some organic from there many years ago. And you think, oh, that's good, I'll get it into my supply chain. And your supply chain is producing the yarn in India. It's then sending it somewhere else for knitting or whatever. And so you say to the guy in India, I want you to start buying cotton from Paraguay. I'm not buying cotton from Paraguay. I don't know anything about cotton from Paraguay. I buy it from India. So I think you have to think about it very carefully and probably choose some simple ones. And I remember my breakthrough with fair trade was I was on the board of the Textile Exchange at the time, and we had a meeting in Izmir in Turkey. And at that meeting was a guy called Hasmukh Patel from Agrocell Industries in India, representing cotton farmers. There was Shekhar Agarwal from Morale Overseas, a spinner in India, and there was Delta Textiles, very familiar to you, Ian, and me, who were knitting and producing garments for M&S. And we sat round the table having a beer. And I said, I would like to put fair trade cotton into M&S. Can we make it happen? And I had everyone assembled in front of me, and we made it happen. But if you try and do this on your own, if you try and do it without collaboration with your supply chain, you will hit amazing brick walls. People don't like change, they don't like disruption. So I would strongly recommend that if you're going down this route, at least find out where you're currently involved. That's where I would always start.
That sounds very, very good advice indeed. Just, I will shortly be moving on to Q&A. I see that we have a few questions here. So for other people on the webinar, do feel free. This is a great time to pop a question into the Q&A panel, and I'll do my best to cover it for you with Graham. I've got one further question for you before we do that, Graham, and that is sort of thinking forward around 5 years, let's say to 2025, let's give a number, is how do you see sustainable cotton progressing, particularly in the apparel and textile industry during that period of time?
I think it's going to increase. I think there is increasing pressure, both coming from consumers wanting to know where their stuff comes from, how it's produced. But I think also now there's all the pressure of water, climate change, food security, and think that, I think cotton uses about 2.5% of the world's arable land for growing it. That could be growing food. So I think that you will see that the production of cotton will increase. It's currently about 26 million tons. It's thought that it probably would never get beyond about 30 million tons. And I think in order to deliver that, there's going to have to be a lot of work done to improve the yield of cotton, because the allocation of land, the application of water, these are things that are going to be more and more difficult to do. So I think there will be a lot of work done to say, okay, well, normally I can grow this amount of cotton on this amount of land. What can I do to actually produce more cotton on the same amount of land? And that comes through breeding of different types of, cultivating different kinds of seeds, better training of farmers to make better, and people like BCI and Fair Trade and Organic. There are all these organisations who are out there to support farmers in doing a better job than they do now, to get more out of what they have available to them. And remember that we may all think of huge cotton plantations in the United States and Brazil. That isn't the way the world is in cotton. You're talking about very smallholder farmers, in whether it be in Africa or in India, all trying to make a living out of growing cotton and with a little bit of food growing alongside it. And those farmers will be better if they're able to produce their cotton in a more sustainable way. Their families will be better, because hopefully they will produce more cotton off the same land with support from these various organisations who provide the training and facilities to do a better job.
Good. Well, that's a good sort of projection into the future. So thanks for that. Now I'll move straight on to Q&A, and we have some interesting questions for you here, Graham.
Right.
Here's the first one from Charlie Bradley Ross. A very eager early question. I'd love to know your thoughts on how to ensure the cotton you're using has a positive impact.
Yeah. Very good question. One that always used to challenge me when I was at M&S. I think today there is a hell of a lot written about these subjects. And there are a lot of people out there who've done studies on this. It depends how much, if you're buying a finished product, then, for example, if it's got the fair trade mark on it, and hopefully there is some understanding that the whole point of fair trade is by creating positive impact, not just for the farmers who grew the stuff, but their community. So there is what's called the fair trade minimum price. That's what the farmer gets paid. And then there's the fair trade premium, which is an extra amount of money which goes to the farmer's community. And that's allocated to building a school or digging a new well or making a better road or something like that. So I think that if there are recognised marks on a product, Soil Association is another one, then you can find out more about what those are about. If someone is just saying this is made with organic cotton, as a customer, I guess then you have to put your trust in who you're buying it from. What do you think of the brand that's putting that label on there? But I think that you have to be, I suppose, there has to be care that this is not a fashion thing done by brands and so on and adopting new schemes. If at the end of the day, the new scheme isn't having any benefit for the people who it's meant to benefit. Yes, you might feel nice and comfy and, oh, I've got a lovely garment in here and it says this is all beautiful cotton. So I think it's incumbent on the brand to actually be able to know that by doing what they've done, somebody's life has improved. But on a finished product, as a consumer, I think it's a matter of how you trust the brand that's telling you this story.
That makes good sense. We've had a question from Tausif. What are your thoughts on the true environmental impact of cotton? And in particular, the metrics for water consumption for cotton fibre are disputed. So can you just expand on that? I know you've touched on it.
Yeah, this is delving into the world of technical stuff now. I can only refer to how I used to look at it. There are, and they're quite old now, 2005, there was a paper written by a guy called Chapagain, I can't remember, and Hoekstra, I think was the other guy's name. And they did a comprehensive study on water use in the agriculture of cotton, not in the textile processing, just in the agricultural part of it. And they divided water up into blue water, green water, and grey water, and each of them has a different kind of definition. The data is very complex. I find it difficult to comment. I think some people say, cotton is using huge amounts of water. It is fairly drought resistant, I would say. But in the case of cotton made in Africa, for example, I gave you, in that case, all the cotton agriculture is rain fed. So it purely relies on rain. In other countries, they irrigate in order to get the cotton grown.
So in other words, it's a very mixed story, and to make a statement that cotton is, from a water usage point of view, an environmental challenge is not always the case. It depends on country by country and region by region.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, definitely.
Yes. Frank Moore has asked a question. We know Frank. He's a very loyal attendee at our events, both live and online. What are retailers doing to explain GOTS, sustainability, organic, etc., to the consumer, so that they can be better informed as to what they are buying?
My experience of this is I was always told customers don't read labels. They look at the product, they feel the product, they decide they like it, they like the price, and someone tells them it's organic cotton or it's fair trade cotton. And you probably get away with one sentence to describe that. If you try and do it More than that, I'm afraid you tend to put customers off. You can do corporate promotions, in-store material. The websites can explain a lot more about what goes on. Yeah, that's it. It's a conundrum between knowing so much information and about what benefit you are creating, but then at the end of the day, you're selling the garment to a customer, and they're not. I'm not saying they're not interested, but you haven't got their attention for a long time.
I've got an interesting one here for you, Graham. What's the difference between organic and green cotton, and is there a demand for green cotton?
First of all, I've never heard of green cotton before, unless you mean green in inverted commas.
Yes, it's not quoted as inverted commas, so I can only just quote the question. If this is not a straightforward one, we can certainly pass on this one.
Just as a sort of an aside, please don't think that cotton has to be white. Right? Okay. You can grow brown cotton. You can grow green cotton. It's just nobody wants it. And there are people who've reintroduced some of these cottons. There's a famous lady from the United States, Sally Fox. She created a variety of colours. So if that's what they mean by green cotton, then it probably is organic anyway. But if they mean green as in green washing or green environmentally or something like that, as a type of cotton, it's not something I've come across.
Now, I'm just wondering if this is a question related to a documentary I and probably you saw a few months ago. What about soilless cotton farming?
Yes.
I saw there was some growing happening in Essex, if I remember.
Yes,
not on your list of worldwide major suppliers at the moment, Graham.
But no, things have changed. Things have changed. This was, I think, if I remember, 3 graduates in something or other in their spare time set up, I think it's called hydroponics, is the form of agriculture. Growing cotton in a tent somewhere in Essex.
It doesn't mention this, by the way. I'm making an assumption here because the question from Emily Floch is how about soilless cotton farming?
Oh, right, okay. Well, I think she's referring to what we just talked about, isn't it?
Yes, I'm making that assumption, Emily. Which is if we've got it all wrong. Yeah. Graham will still give you a good answer anyway.
What I do know is that project has now transferred to India. And not only is it transferred to India, but it's transferred to one of the largest textile producers in India, who themselves are already involved in cotton agriculture. Has it got a future in it? I don't know, but somebody always. It's like watching Tomorrow's World all those years ago. You never thought something would happen at the time when you saw it. Now you take these things for the way it is. I think it's something worth pursuing. I mean, as an aside of that, one of the things I'm always absolutely fascinated about is growing this food in old warehouses in a similar way, where you grow lettuce in a warehouse somewhere in the centre of London. It's a similar thing, taking the growing away from thousands of miles away and bringing it close to where it's required. I think it's something worth keeping an eye on. I don't think it'll enter into anything of any great significance for some years to come, but you never know.
Well, never mind. The thing is, Graham, as you know, we're recording this webinar, so perhaps somebody in 25 years' time will sort of go onto YouTube, find this video, and say, "Aha! Graham predicted this is going to grow." So we'll find out. Yeah. Actually, just to give you a pause for breath, you're working very hard this afternoon, so thank you very much. Here's a nice little comment from Charlie Bradley Ross. I hope not too soppy, but thank you so much for pushing fair trade into M&S, Graham. It takes a lot of cutting through red tape and jumping over hurdles, and we eco-consumers at the other end are so grateful for people like you making these changes. Thank you.
Well, Charlie, thank you ever so much. I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed every single minute of making this happen. It got me into areas of M&S I'd never dealt with before, the press office, the God knows what else office. I was on the front cover of this magazine. I was in the Daily Telegraph. It was brilliant. And I have to say, also pursuing that line of work in M&S, and I'm going to blow my own trumpet here, but I was unique in that sense. Only I did it. And it stood me in good stead since I left. I've enjoyed many years of similar work because of that level of knowledge, but connected to the finished product at the point of retail. So, Charlie, thank you very much for that. And yeah, I enjoyed every minute of it.
You spoke about Egyptian cotton, in some detail a bit earlier on. I've got an interesting one, just to really expand on that, Graham. Is Egyptian cotton a generic species rather than a product from Egypt? And if so, which organisation decided this and when?
Egyptian cotton is, there are several forms of it, okay? And all the forms of it are called Giza something, and they have a number after. And there are probably about 8 or 10 of these Giza varieties.
And they're all, just wants to remind everybody, these are all long staple compared with the medium.
Yes, some of them just about long, and some of them are extra long staple. So when you buy an Egyptian cotton towel, don't think you're getting super duper luxury extra long staple. You're getting the lower end, but it's still good stuff. Egypt does not permit any other. I'm going to get this right. You cannot import seed into Egypt and grow it, cotton seed. So it is government controlled, government managed, and it's very much Egyptian cotton. It's not cotton grown in Egypt. It's Egyptian cotton, and it's not American cotton grown in Egypt. Now, having said that, there are only really 3 types of cotton in a terminology sense. So gossypium is the word that describes cotton. And then you have Gossypium arboreum, which is the very short staple cotton. Gossypium hirsutum, and these are the plant types, which is the upland type cotton. And then you get Gossypium barbadens, which is the long staple cotton. And so if you take Sea Island cotton, which is grown in the Caribbean, that is Gossypium barbadens. The cotton grown in Egypt is Gossypium barbadens, but they're not the same. They're all generically the same plant, if you like, or the same seed or something. But no, even the seed has been varied over all the years. But I think to answer the question, Egyptian cotton is not just cotton grown in Egypt. It is distinctly Egyptian cotton. Absolutely.
I think I'm very, very, very clear on that answer. Thank you very much. Now, I think what I'd like to do is ask our chair, Philippa Watkins, to sort of join in. So first of all, Philippa, thanks for rejoining. Do you have any final question for Graham before we wrap up the webinar?
Yes, my question is from Malukat Ilkamova. My question is, how do you think we can reduce the cotton impact on the environment?
I mean, there are so many initiatives now that this is at the forefront. I mean, organisations like Cotton Incorporated in the United States, who for many years may have tried to distance themselves from having the sort of level of contact with the final consumer, no, not final, brands and retailers. It took them quite a while to really come on board with this. But I think now, in every country that grows cotton, this is at the top of their agenda. Even if it might be still genetically modified or something like that, they're all working on things to actually reduce the impact. because
Yes.
they want cotton to be the fibre of the future. They don't want it to disappear. And so things are being done all over the place, not necessarily under labels like fair trade or organic or whatever, but even just in national cotton organisations, things to grow better seeds, how to use the soil better, how to use water better. This is going on all the time, more so than ever.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
I
Actually,
remember being absolutely struck when I first started in the last 25, 30 years, but how the American cotton growing has also changed a lot by use of GBS systems.
Yes.
So that they can find out where the water is needed at any particular time, or if it needs an insecticide of some sort,
Yes.
or whatever.
Yes.
So it's not blanket coverage anymore. And I know that must have a huge effect, a good effect on the environment.
I would say the sort of in word at the minute in this world is regenerative. I don't know where you've come across this, but people are talking about regenerative agriculture. There is even now a regenerative organic standard that's being created. And this is looking at this much more holistic approach of, what's happening with the soil, what about crop rotation, what other crops are being, and it's taking organic and some of these other things to an even higher level. And you'll find now that there is one of the US brands, Patagonia, have already done some trials of cotton grown in India according to this regenerative principle. So it's evolving all the time. Even the people at what you might call at the bottom of the pile, they're all doing something.
But it's also happening in all forms of agriculture, in fact, as well.
Yes.
It's not just growing cotton. So, I mean, it's obviously a very important aspect of anything to do with agriculture at the moment, in any case. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, in fact, Graham, there are a couple of other questions. Let's just take these last two, actually, because they cover specifics that we didn't cover earlier. So here's the first of those two from Emma Summerscales. Where do you think the solution to unsustainable practices lies? Is it with the brands, the policymakers, or consumers to bring about change? What role could government play?
I think consumers can bring about something by choosing not to buy something from somewhere. You've all seen that happen. And in fact, look at the reverse. You mentioned that article from the New York Times. H&M have said they don't want any more Xinjiang cotton in their products. Now the Chinese consumers are saying, and we don't want to buy any H&M products. So it kind of works the other way. So I think consumers can choose what they want to buy. I think that a lot of the pressure has come from brands and retailers, and I think it will continue to do so. But I do think there's a momentum now within, like Philippa says, within agriculture generally, to do things better.
Yep.
Good. But nearly most things start with some form of campaigners, who we may think they're all a bit nuts at the time, but usually there's something in there somewhere, and eventually it becomes mainstream.
So the final one I'm going to take from our Q&A here today is this one. To convert the current linear model to a circular model, what's the current state of cotton recycling and its future? And I think you have some views about.
My experience with recycled cotton isn't great. I'm well aware of it. I'm well aware that it exists, and it exists more than it did in my latter time at M&S. I think that more will happen, more will progress in this area. If you're taking old clothes and chopping them up and recycling them, then one thing's for sure, you've damaged the quality. There's no doubt about that. So the question is, what virgin products, what new products can you make using cotton that's now of a lower quality than when it started its life? Can you produce a garment that's made from 100% recycled? If so, what's its quality like? Will it perform? Do I have to mix it with non-recycled cotton in order to get to a certain level. Can I take the cotton and dissolve it, turn it into viscose? That's happening. I think there's probably quite something to be said for that. So I suppose it's like I said on some of these other things, they will evolve over time. But I think that the quality of the product has to be something that the consumers will wish to buy when they see it. And so this question comes: how much, if any, how can I make the product out of 100% recycled? Is that possible? Can I make something that's of the right quality? Do I have to mix it with virgin cotton? Whereas I think with things like recycled polyester, it was virtually possible to recreate something that was as good as when it was round the first time, but less so with cotton. But I think people will work on it, and it'll get sorted in its time, soon, maybe, I don't know, next 5-10 years or something.
Good. Well, we look forward to seeing how that and some of the other predictions that you've shared with us move on. Philippa, would you like to pick up from here? Graham, thanks from my point of view. Thank you for your time today. I'll hand over to Philippa.
Thanks for the opportunity.
No, Graham, that was amazing. And I think what is so important, actually, is what we've just finally said, is that these things will continue. And it's vital that any experiment and any research will continue doing it, and something will evolve. The evolution is obviously very, very important. And I think the whole evolution of agriculture itself, I mean, that's something that I've been interested in very much. And it's cotton is all part of that, and I think it's absolutely. But what's interesting is that it's only really been happening in the last 25-30 years, really, hasn't it?
Yes.
It hasn't gone any further than that. But you've really laid it out for us here today. What we can look forward to seeing later with cotton. And me personally, I can't wear anything else except cotton. So I'm delighted to see that we are progressing in the right direction with cotton. And I just, one question, do you know what the proportion of fibre, world fibre, cotton takes up? Is it about, it's about 50% or 40 to 50% world fibre?
No, I've got a figure here, 23%.
Oh, that's much lower than I thought. I thought it was I thought it was higher than that.
23% of world fibre consumption. I think polyester is over 50%, maybe closer to 60%.
So finally, all I can really say now, I think, unless there is anything else, I don't think so. Graham, thank you very much indeed again.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Your time.